Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
All right, well, thank you for joining. And Lisa was a late addition to our agenda. A couple of weeks ago, I saw her blog post, Welcome to the Year of the Customer Marketer. And I'm like, what? Customer marketers, I mean, we all know how tough a job this is and how much pressure we're under, how little cooperation we often get, but how important this role is when it's done right. And we did our whole opening session really talking about what the opportunity is for us to elevate our game and really play a much more strategic role in our company. And so I invited Lisa to join us to have a little fireside chat. Lisa, if we could just talk a little bit about this bold prediction. I think it's part of the planning assumptions that I used to do when I was a Forrester analyst, I remember. And just as a quick note, I'll let you introduce yourself first. But long ago, as I mentioned in the first session, I was a Forrester analyst serving CMOs and really focusing on customer engagement and customer advocacy because that was my passion back then. That was like 2010 to 2013, well before the merger with Sirius Decisions. But now I'm so glad that Sirius Decisions and Forrester came together, and now that there's such a big focus with you managing your research director of a whole team focused on customer engagement and customer experience and B2B. I'm going to do you a disservice. So why don't you just give us a quick introduction of your role and maybe just talk a little bit about your practice area too for people that aren't familiar with it.
So as Jeff mentioned, I come from the Sirius Decisions side of the Forrester Sirius Decisions moniker, and was with Sirius Decisions for about, well, I've been with the combined, if you count them all up, 6 years and change, kind of rounding the corner towards 7. Joined Sirius Decisions after about 15, 20 years as a practitioner in this space, primarily on the customer experience title focus. As the customer marketing being kind of is starting to evolve, I realized that so much of what I did was actually what we now call customer marketing. So it's funny to watch that whole evolution take place. In terms of the area that we support, what I usually say, like the elevator pitch version, is post-sale proactive. So we're very concerned about what happens once your buyers, your prospects, become customers. And that goes, adoption, loyalty, advocacy, growth, that whole continuum. And we have, because, we're Sirius Decisions, we have models and frameworks and how-tos and worksheets and all that good, happy stuff to make it real. But part of our annual process is very much, as Jeff mentioned, at Sirius Decisions, we do these things called planning assumptions, which are pretty practical in nature. The Forrester friends do predictions that are a little more pie in the sky, meant to be quite controversial, frankly, because our side of the business is all B2B. And because we've all been practitioners and that's our focus about, adopt, operationalize, optimize, we are a little more into this is how you do it, even in our forward-looking materials. So that's kind of how we came to be with this planning assumptions that we do every year. And before you start asking questions, Jeff, I'm going to jump right in and just say that the reason that I call 2021 the year of the customer marketer is because we've had some things happen that are a natural evolution of how things are working in B2B. We have some ways that we've captured what's changed about buying in our world, which of course is going to have a huge impact on being a customer. Things that buyers want, they're certainly going to not care about once they become customers. And there are things like transparency and some of these other buying influences. And then comes COVID. Mm-hmm. And everybody I talk to is all about retention with a capital R painted in the sky. How to protect the base, how do we retain? We've got to make sure that we don't churn a bunch of our clients. So an unfortunate event has actually shined quite a spotlight on the retention component of what we do. Now, retention is the outcome, right? That's what we're looking for because you certainly can't grow what you can't keep. But that's kind of how a couple of the forces have come to really make this the year that we care so very much about that. And I'll add that another little spark to the whole thing is this hyper focus on employee engagement.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of you, I hope a lot of you work for companies that have been really good to you during these times, that have, really given you the kind of support and flexibility and the kind of thing we need to be engaged employees to survive this time that we're all in. So we certainly have seen, just from a personal perspective, I've really seen Forrester step up in that way. And a lot of my clients, their companies are doing the same. So I feel like that employee piece really comes into play for organizations to be more amenable to understanding their customers as well.
Well, I love that you say that, because there are people on this call, actually, on this at this conference, who have dual roles with both customer engagement and employee engagement. And I thought that was very interesting to see a couple people having that role. But
Yeah,
but
and
as
that's a
yeah,
fun one.
yeah,
You know,
right.
two of the hardest things to get money for, sure.
Exactly, right. And that was actually my reason. Like when I read your headline there in the year of the marketer, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, that's going to be music to the ears of everybody in customer marketing, everybody in our CustomerX community here. And so it's great to hear what sort of motivated that. I mean, we were talking this morning about how it was the perfect storm, what we're seeing here, of a lot of things coming together that COVID just sort of capitalized on in our opening session, or brought to the forefront. And so I wanted to ask a little bit, though, because in the conversations I have with the C-level executives at my client companies, a lot of this is being driven by them. They're the ones that are saying, we have to sort of batten down the hatches now and really focus on retention. We have to keep these customers because we don't know how long this storm will last. We don't know how hard new customer acquisition will get. Those are some of the things I'm hearing. Can you tell me, like, what some of those C-level you know the things you're hearing that went into this conclusion that you had about this
Yeah.
being the year of the customer marketer?
And I think a lot of it, so I'll talk about specifically about C-level CMOs. So let's start
Sure.
with them.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
CMOs are in this space where, and we see probably about three different profiles. One is the CMO that says, man, I worked my tail off to get these customers in the door. I ought to have some influence in keeping them. That's just kind of like the balance. I have some CMOs that we've had conversations with where the CEO or some board member comes along and decides, like, this, this retention thing, this focus thing, maybe it's a CFO who realizes through their data that, man, it is a lot more expensive to acquire than it is to keep. However that works out. And then the CMO is voluntold that they're now responsible for this area. So that's the
Yep.
second scenario. And then we'll see an organization where it's a natural part of their being. So this is often companies that are, we call them, like, born in the cloud, or they have a recurring revenue model or subscription model from day one. Those folks will come in with a better understanding of, you have to balance, right? It's kind of a native thing. What they're looking for is kind of the, in what order do I do these things? There's a bazillion things I could do to engage with my existing customers. What are the right ones? What are the, what's foundational, what's table stakes, that kind of thing. So variety of different scenarios.
And would all three of those profiles be playing into this planning assumption that you came up with?
Probably more the voluntold person and the one who's had the lip service of, I really ought to do something about these existing customers. And they're finally at that precipice where either the timing because of the pandemic, or it's just working out for them, or they're finally seeing that wedge where they can see beyond demand and into customer engagement. A couple different scenarios there. I have one client I've been working with who they've been very demand centric, and she knows that their 2021 mission, they're kind of a land and expand business anyway, but now's the time that they're really going to focus on buyer personas customer personas. They've got their buyer motion down pretty well, and they're taking a lot of that knowledge and learnings, and it's the right time. And we just had a customer marketing summit with that client virtually, where she brought in a variety of other functions so that they heard definitions and they saw some common approaches, and kind of she tried to get everybody to kind of get religion in the same room, and, like, bring your questions. If you have questions, if you have doubts, let's just knock them down, talk about it, and figure it out. So
Oh, that's
action.
great.
We're trying to
Action,
action.
yes. Right. And I know you talked about customer personas. I mean, one of the passions of mine, in addition to customer marketing and all things customer, is also buyer insights, and that's another thing I did at Forrester as an analyst. But they're so related, right? Because what more you know about the buyers, the more you can target your customer programs, especially as it relates to influencing, new customer acquisition, earning trust with retention and expansion. Which that's another thing I'm hearing too from CEOs, is really focusing on expansion within existing accounts. But what that buyer, the buyer's insights, when I've been doing buyer interviews during COVID, I mean, a lot of people have said that, yeah, we're getting a lot more scrutiny than we've ever gotten in our buying process. We're being asked to do more due diligence and only buy what's absolutely necessary, because on the buying side, they don't know how long things are going. And so I'm wondering, have you seen anything like that from reflected in the CMOs, and recognizing that maybe there's some uncertainty on the buying side in their markets, that they need to, another reason to really double down on customers.
Yeah, and that speaks to the comment you made about expansion. And expansion to me is that umbrella term that includes both upsell and cross-sell.
Yep.
So, which are two very distinct motions, right? So that's another conversation perhaps for another time. But the idea that expanding from your existing customer base, I think there's some just human logic to it. Like, we need to be above the cut line. When people decide what they're going to spend their money on, we got to be above the cut line. So you have to have shown value. You have to have supported these people across the customer life cycle. This is where customer success comes into play in a huge way. If you've got a dedicated team or capability, if you're more full digital, that ensures that folks are adopting and utilizing and seeing the value, and you have a way to pipe it back. Like, here's what and it's all about living up to the brand promise, right? That's what we're here for. So if you're showing them that this is why you bought, and you're getting it, not to take away the conflict from our storytelling conversation earlier, but that's where you're going, right? Here's why you bought, here's what we delivered, and make that partnership. Like, it isn't just us. Like, you have these CSMs that are like, you have to do some things too, give to get, and we're going to work together and make it all happen. So you start to get the customer marketing layer, which is more programmatic, and the customer success team that's account based. And we really get that old cliche of 1 + 1 = 3 when we can get those cooking together, because that's what's going to make the difference in retention. You can send all the beautiful marketing you want. You can stand up the world's best, series of webinars, but you've got to have a little more to it to bring the engagement full circle. And that's what we're seeing right now, which makes us think. I think last year I talked about in our planning assumptions a lot about, it was customer success was going to go beyond just subscription. And we've certainly seen that, where that motion, right? Even if they don't call it, whatever they call it.
Right.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing some companies now doing to get customer success and customer marketing working better together? Or what are some examples of them working better together? Like what are they collaborating on?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting because I've had really fascinating conversations just in the last week, where customer success teams have been kind of doing, I don't know what you want to call it, rogue marketing. They've kind of been doing their own little, backwater marketing, because they couldn't get the attention they needed or wanted from marketing. So they were doing all these things themselves, which is inefficient, probably not on brand. And it has its own set of issues. And finally, at the leadership level, there's been some aha. And the other point I think somebody was making earlier today was how hard this work is to do bottoms up. If you don't have that executive alignment, it's that much harder. So we're seeing more and more customer success. Now, bear with me, customer success leaders, not just being managers and directors, but that particular function elevating to a VP or even a not quite C-level, but they're getting there. So they're more likely to be a peer of a marketing leader, where that coordination can actually happen. And I hate any of this. I usually talk about capabilities and not functions and orgs. I don't like to, kind of tell people, if you don't have this thing called whatever, you're doomed. It's more of a capability, but that the elevation of customer success and post-sale focus on customers as opposed to buyers, those two forces coming together at a peer level, that's where you're getting a ton of that ability to click in and to make it work, right?
Well, and so that's customer success, but the elephant in the room, I think, with our with the customer marketers is the fact that demand marketing, demand gen people, lead gen people tend to get all the budget and all the resources in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that CMOs now, marketing leaders, are going to need to start to view them as peers. So how is that going to happen? What do those conversations you're having sound like with marketing leaders about when you say these need to be peers? When in too many of the companies I work with, they're tucked under, sales enablement. The customer marketers, they're tucked someplace because they found somebody that was willing to take them. Not because they're placed at a strategic point in the organization. So how does that happen?
And that's fair. And I think that there's a number of influences. Certainly if a CMO is going to say, I am going to put skin in the game for post sale, and I'm going to have a customer marketer, we advise a lot of times, they'll come to us and say, I'm just going to grab someone from demand and I'm going to tell them they're now customer marketing. And we say like, okay, back up just a little, because we see them as siblings, right? They share some DNA, but they're not the same. And so we kind of coach people through the concept of, demand marketers are very used to things being in place, like the Serious Decisions demand unit waterfall, and having a lot of technology that automatically helps you better align sales and marketing to, click through these demand waterfall stages and all this other good, happy stuff. And it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end that tends to have a pretty finite time frame. Customer marketers, we want it to never end. Right? We want this to go on forever. So we talk about, an episode of Law and Order versus a soap opera, as far as like the how we look at it. So it's a little different, the people doing it. And then I want to, was it Erwin that asked me about the Serious Decisions campaign framework? So that's something that we've had, forever and a day. Just this last year, we've added a program family. So there's reputation, demand, enablement, and now engagement. So it's our way of trying to codify out to the market, and certainly to our client base, that this is something that, although you might have these great programs, engagement programs out there, and I see a couple of people on the call who have actually won awards from Serious Decisions for their programs. I see you, Asha May, and a couple other people for these great programs that they've done. But what happens is, it's not necessarily coordinated and orchestrated and planned for on an annual plus with the kind of rigor and discipline that other programs might be in a campaign framework. So it gives us a way to elevate and legitimize in the marketing mind, right? So this is a CMO owned thing that we haven't had before. Again, this is from the Serious Decisions perspective, and I certainly hope you all use it and love it. But it's one sign that this is happening and that this is kind of the way people are organizing. We've had the same conversation at Serious Decisions. I mean, 4 years ago when I established this service, my demand people were looking at me like, what is that again? So I mean, we've had to have that same evolution within the analyst community as well, which is certainly interesting.
And so I was curious, how did that come about that this got added to the framework? Was that your doing, coming from the customer engagement side, or was it a recognition more holistically, would you say, on the looking at the campaign framework and the Serious Decision frameworks to make that as part of it?
I think a big part of it was the analyst team in our CMO service, who are having conversations every day with CMOs and who are recognizing that trend and understanding. Now, would I like to say, like, I screamed and yelled until it was made so? No. But it was an evolution. We are evolving how we look at the world the same way the world is evolving. And some of these trends you talked about, B2B expectations being pushed by our consumer lives, and buying behavior changing, and the idea that there are legitimately, people understand demand unit waterfalls and buying groups. Well, why aren't there retention groups? And why isn't there a retention model? And why, so
Right.
it starts to, people's minds kind of naturally accept this balance and a bookending, but it takes time.
Yes. Well, that's for sure. And so what are you telling CMOs then specifically what they should be doing as it relates to budgets, org structures, or things, if we really want to see this year of the customer marketer materialize? I mean, what does that really mean to have them viewed as peers? I mean, should they be getting more budget? Should they be getting brought to more strategic planning discussions? How does that play out from the CMO's perspective? Because the reason I'm asking this is because we have people, I told people in this conference to bring your bosses to this session. so we might have a few VPs of marketing on the call as well. So.
I think that more and more there's the understand. I don't think it's as much of a land grab as it once was. I think that there is more of a willingness, because honestly, demand marketers they're looking for, every year they're given this big nut to crack, like this huge number or set of numbers. And if you, as a customer marketer who perhaps has advocacy as part of customer references and advocacy as part of your remit, you can help those demand marketers in a big way if you are able to work together and target the kind of reference materials and advocacy interactions and activities and content. There's so much possible uplift for demand from that customer side. And certainly having the idea that, the pressure demand is getting, and I think someone in the chat is talking about upsell campaigns. They're getting a huge amount of pressure in that space. And what happens is, as customer marketers, nobody knows your customer base within the marketing organization better. I'm not talking buyers, I'm talking customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the ability to participate in campaign planning, to build an engagement program, you're in at ground level. So those all come together. And I think that partnership with customer success is huge, because what you're doing is you're saying, we're going to drive adoption. We're going to drive utilization. We're going to drive value achievement. How much more perfect can I make it to set the table for you to sell them the next thing than by doing these?
Right. And so that's such a great point. I want to dive into that, but does it start with the CMO, or are you expecting it, as you look at your crystal ball for 2021, are you expecting that to be driven by CMOs to start to pull customer marketers into saying, hey, you can do more to collaborate and work with demand gen to infuse customer voice and customer participation and things into their programs that make them more effective? And likewise, they can do more with you to help you be more programmatic about, maybe what you're doing, upsell campaigns or things like that. Do you think that's going to come from the CMO? Or do you think that more often than not, that's going to need to come from the customer marketer exerting more influence when they don't have authority and socializing the power of what they know about customers and the voice that they've captured from customers and things like that? Or is it going to be a combination of the two?
I think the cutting edge of that is going to be probably CMO driven, because as you know, as customer marketers, there's a variety of directions you can take, levers, buttons. There's no shortage of things we can do. And so that translation of the impact that the CMO is on the hook for, they will mandate in a big way, but then it's up to us to translate that back up to them about, okay, in order to get there, knowing what I know about our business and our customer base and all the stuff that I'm living, then you're going to advise going the other way. But it is tricky, I will say. So I think that if it comes to, when will it be that customer marketers have the influence to say, hey, Mr. CMO, this is what you should be doing? Maybe that's the year of 2022.
Right.
But in terms of balancing resource, balancing focus, that's where I'm going with that 2021. And also pulling those programs into a cohesive universe. And to your earlier point, there's nothing scarier than walking to an environment and you're like, advocate, who does customer advocacy? Well, sales does some reference stuff and product does some of this stuff. Oh, and then support owns this community thing. And these guys are like, okay, if we can pull that all in to customer marketing, even if you don't call it customer marketing, and some people get very twisted around, those kinds of things, but to have that capability centralized, and then you're going to start to get some people on your side in the customer success organization, which has become more and more visible and powerful. And then you
Right.
start to get into your customer operations people, right? There's marketing operations, there's sales operations, and now we're seeing the evolution of a customer operations capability. So even more fun there, right? You get data, you get process, you get all the things that appeal to the folks really trying to wrap their arms around, what do I get for my investment?
Right. Very interesting. Well, I call that pattern that you just talked about, I call that like the random acts of customer proof,
You
right?
bet.
That happens across so many organizations today. And are you seeing that? Like, do you see signals in 2020 that those different disparate asks, people that have asks of the customer, as well as those that are trying to offer value to the customer, are they starting to come together?
Big time.
Or
Yeah,
big
yeah.
time they are. Can you give
Yeah.
some
And I think
examples of
that's
how
because
that's playing out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's because over the last, I don't even want to put a timeline on it, but let's call it 5 years. When those of us who've been in this space 5 years or longer, we came into a world where it was a constant, like, I'm asking my customers to do us another favor. Like it's the favor thing, right? And it became our biggest, I don't know who it was on the earlier chat that was talking about a session about getting around the VP of no. Like, I mean, that was the nonstop. What we've evolved to and are in the process of evolving to in a lot of cases is to change the understanding that customers like doing this stuff, right? There are ways that they are motivated that we can tap into. There are folks who want to be on the cutting edge and they want to be the new and they want to like be the expert in their company on your product or service. There are people that want to amplify their career position, that are, they'll get in front of any group to do any conference, anywhere, anytime, just tell them where to be, because that's what really drives them. And then there are people, if you look at a company like a Marketo, there are people whose affiliation with Marketo is their career.
Right.
So that
Yes.
that ability to say, I am a Marketo, it's some degree of purple because it's Marketo, but it's like platinum or whatever. Marketo could make it so that they only accept a certain number per year and you have to reapply every year to be part of it. It's an advocacy component, but it's something people are so eager to get to, they apply every year to re-up their status. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're seeing, that give, get, and advocacy being much more of an ecosystem than us constantly asking customers to do us a favor. And that's how we get around this sales VP of no, by the way, too.
Yes, and it's funny you say that too, about because we're so conditioned to be in this beg for favor modes, and then offer a reward, and that's what I was saying on the earlier session. I consider that paid advocacy versus earned advocacy, and but I do so many customer interviews for my clients, and when I'm talking to the customers, we'll be at the end of doing an interview, and I'll say, oh, this was such amazing insight that you gave us. Thank you so much. And this was for the purpose of creating customer voice to use in the market, in their marketing and sales efforts. And what will happen is the customer will say, oh no, thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I wish they had asked me years ago to participate in things like this.
Who doesn't like to be heard?
Yeah, who doesn't like to be heard? And I like to say, people love sharing their knowledge, experience, and advice, right? Knowledge because it makes you feel smart, experience because it makes you feel successful, and advice because you want to be heard.
And they want to influence. I mean, these are people that, so we had a really interesting finding that we talked about in a presentation not too long ago at our summit, where we found, using our benchmark database, that increase in NPS survey participation rates is even more highly correlated than the score.
Yes.
And if you think about that, for those of us who've been in the space for a long time, we're like, well, of course, even if they give you a 4, they cared enough to tell you suck.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And that's probably just as, if not more valuable than the people who just randomly give you a 9 or a 10 because they think that's what you need.
Yes. Oh, I agree. I mean, actions speak louder than words, right? And that action, that behavior that somebody actually took the time to do that, that's a statement of their commitment to your firm, even if they say you're a 4. And they might have a good reason to say you're a 4, but that doesn't mean they're not engaged. And,
they're saying, you're a 4, please fix it. Right? They're giving you the opportunity to act on it. Whether or not we do, whole nother set of conversations.
And then how about this whole area of cross-sell and upsell? And I know you said they're 2 different things. I would love to have you talk about, like, define how they're different
Yeah.
and what each one is, and then also a little bit about how is that going to play forward now with customer marketing playing a role there, because they've got the keys to the kingdom to play such a strong role there. Demand gen tends to run the actual programs. I mean, the campaign type programs, right? Like you said, the ones that have a start and an end. And so if you could just define, your definition of between the two of them, and then how is that going to come in the year of the customer marketer? How's customer marketing going to get involved, and who are they going to work with to run cross-sell or upsell or expansion? Land and expand.
It's fascinating that the timing is really, really great, because we're in the process at Forrester of taking our demand unit waterfall into the customer lifecycle.
Oh,
so
nice.
We want to have a way to use that same level of rigor that we have, unit types and this is not my native language. I'm not a demand marketer by trade. So, the have to things and the SLAs and all the different words we're going to use for everything moving around.
MQLs.
Yes, exactly. So we're in the process of working with Kerry Cunningham, who's kind of the guru of all things demand unit waterfall. And he and I and the team we now are moving our way through these different kinds of units. And this will include a variety of different types of cross-sell units that'll have. So, I mean, we're getting into the granular, like it's not just red wine, it's Cabernet from this vineyard in Napa with this, really kind of all the way into the detail. So look for that to be coming out. Certainly, we'll do the Big Bang thing at our summit in May, but that's the kind of thinking that's evolving. So that we can think about, so upsell is, more of the same to the same buying center, right? So, more of the same, or, things that are complementary. So they bought the product, now you're going to add some training. Then you talk about upsell, and that's a new buying center. So that's the easiest way to think about it to me, is kind of more of the same, more stuff to the same versus new stuff to a new buying center. So that's the most simple way to kind of cross-sell, upsell. And that's why, customer success organizations will often have a natural affinity for upsell, because they can kind of figure out what is in that product, ancillary to that product, that the customer might benefit from, versus something net new that's much more of a quota-bearing salesperson's responsibility. So
right,
you get a little of that going on. So that's kind of how we're looking at it as far as that orchestration and modeling of it. Now, when it comes to the who does what, the partnership between customer and demand marketing is going to have to be pretty darn tight around cross-sell. And we're working with a couple of clients that are doing just that, that are really trying to bring into modern times things that they've been doing through sharing spreadsheets and, kind of frightening things to pass these things around. But that's where the partnership really is, because frankly, you can spin up new demand anywhere in the customer lifecycle, right? Theoretically, you could spin up new demand pretty darn early, depending on the profile of who you've sold and what you've sold them, and what the organization looks like. But there are companies out there that live and breathe this stuff. I'm thinking of like a company called Anaplan. So they're planning software. If they don't land, they land in one department. And you need planning in finance, sales, marketing, logistics. You need planning everywhere. But they land in one, and they absolutely are fine-tuned for growing into other departments. They cannot sustain their business on one department in a bazillion companies. That's not how it's going to work for them. So they are very good at that land and expand motion, a lot of it through customer journey mapping work that they've done, a rock solid customer success team that they've put into place. A lot of this like quick delivery of value, documentable delivery of value, so that the next bounce is that much easier.
Right. And so what could customer marketing start doing in that scenario? Because I know you said that the other side is a little easier for them, right? To the same customer that they're dealing with, what else could they use? It's probably easier for them to recognize, but they're also making this one department successful. They ideally, because again, the theme of our conference about elevating your game, we want them to connect more to the strategic growth initiatives of their company. And land and expand, or expansion in general, is a strategic growth initiative of a lot of companies right now. And customer marketing should play a role with that. I mean, and as I'm asking the question, I'll just give you, one example in any kind of seat-based model like Forrester, right? I mean, when I was running marketing there, I did expansion campaigns into our premier accounts, which were the top 80 at the time. I don't know if they're still the premier account group, but we would get like at Microsoft, we would get the voice of champions at Microsoft, power users that were making heavy use of Forrester, and then get them to share their voice with other people in other product groups or other business lines that didn't have seats with Forrester. And it was way more powerful than it was sending analysts out there to do brown bag lunches in Redmond, right? I mean, that's how influential their peers are. Not that we stopped sending analysts to Redmond, but you know what I mean, right? So I guess, I do think customer marketers can play a role even looking for the expansion opportunities. I mean, are you suggesting they kind of shy away from that? Or is there somebody else that should be taking the lead on that?
I mean, I think that's where a lot of folks that are living in the reference and advocacy space have a natural play here, to be able to capture what's working well, if it's in your organization or one like you. That evidence and risk mitigation for any kind of new purchase is huge. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think that component has got so much strength. It doesn't always jump out that way. Sometimes we have clients that'll work with influencer programs, which is a little more kind of what you're talking about, where it's kind of that internal advocates when you're moving from a department to a department within an existing company. We still see that dynamic, frankly, at Serious Decisions Forrester. We have clients that leave their company. So in effect, they churn from us. Mm-hmm. Not much time passes before they reappear with that same need at another company. So the fact that we treated them well and we're able to deliver value, they take that with them to their next gig, whether it's another department in the same company or whether it's a new company altogether. That's something that when we developed our retention model, that's one of the signals that we want organizations to account for, is their previous experience or exposure to you should be accounted for when you're doing your retention modeling and how you're reading signals and activities that you provide, et cetera. Because it's something that, our research has shown from our buying studies, 80% of buying decisions are based on customer experience, either direct or indirect. Mm-hmm. The biggest chunk being previous experience with you. So if you don't treat them well, they're coming back one way or the other.
So there's been a lot of good banter going on the chat stream here. And so I want to encourage people, if you have a question specifically that you want to ask of Lisa, either raise your hand in the chat stream and come on and we'll let you voice it, or just type the question in. But while I'm just scanning to hear.
And I love the people are talking about predictive stuff.
Right.
There's definitely a place here for predictive technologies. Mm-hmm. We see some of the organizations, that we work with doing a nice job around renewal, for example. Anybody who's ever been in that part of the business and you have to discount to get that renewal, and that's just brutal, right? Mm-hmm. What if we could show them the value across the entire life cycle, so we didn't have to pull out the discounting card? Right. So getting more predictive about which activities and which interactions you should really bet on, right? Where should you put your energy? Because those activities, those interactions are highly correlated to retention. Yep. You don't have to discount.
Right. And so while we're waiting for some questions to come in, and I think they're starting to come in now, but what's the punchline here is, what do customer marketers need to do? You're saying that there's this opportunity now that for this to be the year of the customer marketer, but they can't just sit back and wait for it to happen, mm-hmm. right? They're going to have to be proactive. So what advice would you give to the people on this call who are the practitioners, they're directors and market and management level people of CustomerX, customer marketing, customer advocacy, customer engagement? What do they need to do to step into this opportunity and really shine?
So I'd give it 3 or so different discrete pieces of advice. The first one would be to take a step back and really understand if your work is tethering up to the big business imperative. And I don't mean activities, right? So case studies are important, videos are important, testimony, they're all important and critical to a lot of pieces of the business. But does doubling the number of case studies that you produce next year versus this year, how do you tether that up to the business imperative of retention,
Right.
or growth from your existing customer base, right? If you can't tell that story pretty concisely, you probably need to think about your mix and what it is you're going to be doing, and to be extremely vocal about what you're doing and why, obviously with your leaders' buy-in up the chain of command. The other thing is to buddy up strong with anything in your organization that resembles customer success. Anybody out there whose job it is to, because these people are measured on a health scorecard, or they have some kind of measure. If you can contribute to their success, they're going to be more than happy to say, where some of the success came from. That partnership, I obviously am biased, but I strongly suggest that you look at it from a customer life cycle stage and phase perspective, so you can figure out if everybody's doing a kick-ass job on onboarding, okay, maybe we don't lean in hard to help them with their onboarding. Maybe we look at the next stage, or that kind of thinking. But you really, double up with those folks. The third thing would be take a hard look at where the power lives in your organization right now. I have clients who are partnering with their friends in the solutions marketing team or the product team, or, it's a little unconventional, right? They're not necessarily being all about marketing. If they know there's this huge new product set coming out that the organization is highly dependent upon, maybe VOC, to make that more rock solid, is your play. I'm just throwing something out there, but think about those elements of the business that organizationally your connection perhaps needs to be stronger. Hard to go wrong with buddying up with demand too.
Right. And we'll say more about that too, because there's actually a session on that coming up later this week. But I'd love to get your perspective on that, because I mean, that's one of the things that I do with my clients, is really with customer marketers, is really socialize what you're doing with demand and the value that you can provide to them. But demand sometimes is marching to a different drum, or maybe a different cadence. But once they see the light, because they're always starved for content, and fresh content and compelling content that drives behavior and influences mindsets, which is what customer voice does. So, I mean, how do
and
we?
You can also let them know it resonates. If you're doing customer persona work, right? If you're digging into what your customers care about, where they go, who they listen to, what formats and approaches resonate with them, your demand team, as you said, is hungry for that kind of information, and you own that
Right.
set of data or access to people who can proxy for buyers or provide, there's a lot of different approaches that you can use, but that's so powerful. And I saw something about, Sue talking about strategies for formalizing that onboarding bit. So what I would suggest you do is to look at a persona-based onboarding. So not everybody should be onboarded the same way, and help customer success to really understand the personas that they're onboarding or responsible for onboarding, and help deliver a program on a per persona basis. You're not going to want to tell them about this great executive golf event you're having if they're onboarding users, and you're not going to want to send tips and tricks to execs. So as a very simple kind of idea. So think about perhaps really getting them savvy about the differences between the different personas that they need to onboard, and build accordingly.
Right. And then, so another big theme that I'm hearing from the executives is, and it's actually one of it's on our subway map of topics for this session, that is the customer to customer engagement. And so executives are saying, and it used to be, 10 years ago, and Microsoft did an amazing job of this, about driving customer to customer engagement to reduce support costs. But now going beyond support costs as it relates to retention, onboarding, usage, adoption, value realization, right? I mean, what are some creative ways you would suggest, or even examples you've seen of people that are doing that through customer to customer engagement, customers helping each other get more value out of using your platform or whatever it may be.
And you're exactly right. So customer communities started out as a way for organizations to offload support.
Right.
Like, we'll have them answer each other's questions. Brilliant. They won't call us. Like, we can hire fewer agents. Over time, this has evolved into actual, customer communities. And people vary depending on how much of it they put, in front of the paywall versus behind and whatnot. But what we're really looking at is by virtue of their being your customer, they get access to this network of people who are smart and forward thinking or just like them, whether they're joining for therapy or whether they're joining to share tips and tricks, those kinds of customer communities. And we also see, Dave Andrews, who was formerly with Pitney Bowes, and I've forgotten, if you're on the line, Dave, I'm really sorry, I forgot the name of the new company where you're working, but they did an awesome job with standing up their community, not just for the customers, but it became a way that the development community was getting access to what customers were talking about and caring about, being pinged to answer questions and provide insights and information. And that community became so much more engaged and excited and enthusiastic. He's like, wow, I just did a massive employee engagement campaign with our engineers and I had no idea I was doing it. kind of what happened, right? So this group of people internally got that much more excited, and they were interacting with clients, and clients were excited to have access to actual product developers in a way they'd never had before for the right segment of customers. You don't want everybody going out to developers, but customer community is more and more common in a customer marketing toolkit because it's one of those things where properly nurtured and attended to, this is not a set it and forget it, you can have such a powerful opportunity for these folks to get value from you and from others. And sometimes you even do it kind of a step back and it's just like, sponsored by underneath. You may not even have to push hard anything that you have to offer. Just by virtue of being your customer, they get this great access.
Oh, that's awesome. So I'm just looking at some of the things that people have been asking in the stream. There was one, what do you think about incentivizing sales on consumption and growth? Incentivizing.
Okay,
Well, I guess it does.
Incentive thing.
Yeah. Yep.
I would like to hear more about the scenario where that's something that people are feeling like they need to do. So I'm going to put that caveat right in front. But I think salespeople aren't as coin operated as we once thought, but they are in a high risk, high reward profession. And anything we can do to take down the risk to make the reward better, okay. But I find that when I've done that kind of program before, what kind of money are you going to have to offer to get these people to rise above the other incentives that they have? I mean, that to me is just a huge challenge. And I think that a salesperson's incentive is to sell. And if you're making that easier, you're kind of there. That's a tricky one. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of incentives, monetary incentives in general in B2B. But I do know that there are times, there are certain audiences who get very excited about points that they can use for t-shirts or swag, or, I mean, I get it. There for some organizations and some activation platforms out there do that a lot in the gamification and points thing, and it seems to work. But you have to keep it fresh. You have to keep it interesting. Once they've got the t-shirt, the mouse pad, and the whatever, they're going to kind of tune out.
Right. So Rebecca's asking, how do you see a product-led growth approach work with customer marketing?
Yes, product-led growth, hot topic.
It is, yes.
And I find this fascinating because we spent years at Serious Decisions trying to get people to think audience centricity instead of product centricity. We're trying to get people to get off the speeds and feeds conversation and get into the, what value do you get from this stuff? Because it's the go-to for tech companies, actually most companies, how much faster we are, how many more bits and bytes and whatever else. So this one's a little trickier for me, but your product is what you're delivering. It is what you're all about. So I think it's fair enough to talk about product in that sense. I just want to make sure that it isn't the pendulum swinging all the way back the other way for us.
Right. Good point. So any other advice that you're giving to people? Like, again, we're only a month, oh no, what are we, 2 months away from the new year. And so what are some things that that customer marketers should be doing right now to start to increase their influence, increase I know you mentioned 3 key great points earlier, but anything else as it relates to influence? And because that's one of the tracks of our conference here as well, is how do you display leadership without authority? And because this is a tough job, right? It takes a village to be a customer marketer. You have to have all this cooperation from every other group in your company, but it's not always easy to get. And so are there some specific things you would recommend on how to gain that cooperation through leadership when you don't have the authority?
So I think I'm going to kind of fall back on, give yourself a little bit of runway, but be specific about what you're doing. So what I mean by that is you need to tether up to the big business imperative. You need to understand what your CEO is saying are these top 3 must-haves for the year, and be able to tell that story through your management chain as to why that's, what you're doing. Also, understand your baseline, which is really important. A lot of people get really spun up on activities and doing all these things without understanding where they were, so they can show where they're going. And also to think about your measurement in a short, medium, and long-term perspective. So there are things that you're going to be able to do short term, and I hate the phrase low-hanging fruit, but you know where I'm going with that.
It works, yeah.
Some short-term impacts that you're going to have, and then medium and longer term things that take a little more time. I've been in this space for 20 some odd years, and I will confess I have gotten trapped in the being so wrapped up in the big picture and knowing all the work I'm doing is leading to it, that someone comes to you 6 months in and is like, what do you got to show for it? Like, yeah, but this thing we're doing, it's like, no.
Right.
So, I think short, medium, and long term, kind of get that pacing going, tethering up to the big business imperatives, and partnering. You have to be a little political with who you partner with and where you're going to go. It's just like when you're starting up a reference program or an advocacy program, you want to get the word from that salesman, salesman who is the high achieving, goes to President's Club every year, shows up with a new shiny car every year. That's the person you want to have other people say, oh yeah, I worked with these reference people. They were pretty good. Like, oh, it really helped my deal. Or, be strategic in your partnering. And I have a couple of clients that are just 2-people shops, and who they're partnering with is making all the difference.
Right. Well, it's those opinion leaders that everybody looks up to and respects, right? The top producing sales guy, the heroes in the organization.
And try to and really try to look where the pain is. Right. That's the other side of it. Not just the people that are doing great, but also the people with the biggest pain that's very visible, because that's another area. And again, it came up again this morning with a really big company that you'd all recognize the name of, around customer success doing their shadow marketing stuff, because they didn't really have a choice. And the customer marketing team, newly focused team, is working with them to offload a lot of that ineffective stuff that frankly is providing a suboptimal customer experience as well, and getting that pain released from that group.
So just one more note for people: continue to fire away questions. If you typed one earlier in the chat that I overlooked because there was such active participation there, type it again at the bottom and we'll get it in front of Lisa. Lisa, let me just ask while we're waiting if there's any last minute questions from the audience. Is there, so I'm very familiar with the Forrester proper pre-serious decisions customer life cycle. It was always a circle, a spinning circle with multiple stages. But the demand waterfall was sort of the waterfall approach, right? Kind of more like a funnel. Just curious, because I'm an analyst geek at heart, how are the models going to be rationalized so that you can weave the customer lifecycle post-sale into the which I think you said was the demand waterfall, or just the bigger model? Because you mentioned that was coming. That was super exciting for me to hear, because I've always thought it's a shame that these models break at that point and you have to transfer to another one that works differently.
Yeah, and I think that the easiest way to look at it, and the joining together of two companies like Forrester and Serious Decisions, a lot of pros, a lot of upside, but little kinks and little
Yep.
issues along the way to get everything blended. We look at the way that things, like we have this idea of vision, strategy, and execution.
Yep.
And for the B2B side of the house, which is my world, Forrester is a great player in the vision. And we do some vision work, our planning assumptions and some of those kind of things. But where Serious Decisions really shines is in the strategy and execution component. So taking a corporate strategy into your functional strategy, into how do I do this now? So we're finding a lot of synergies within that kind of stream with the, let's call them Forrester Classic analyst team that I work with, the Laura Ramoses and TJ Kitts of the world. And then, with my team looking at that really, B2B post-sale. and that's why we're so pedantic about buyer versus customer language.
Mm-hmm.
So Monica Banky, who is the head of all Serious Decisions Research, has a wonderful analogy. So she's Canadian by birth, but she lives in Austin, Texas, and by way of Connecticut. So what she says is, when I'm in Texas, when we say snow, people go, snow, oh my God, it's snow. They understand it. When I lived in Connecticut and growing up in Canada, I needed to know a lot more about what kind of snow it was. So is it dry snow? Is it slushy snow? Whatever, all the different, there's like 6 or 7, there's a crazy number of words for snow. I'm from California, so I don't know those either. But you need to know the kind of snow so that you can drive, so that you can get your kids to school, so that you can decide how you're going to live your life, depending on these kinds of snow. And that's her thing about the way the Forrester and Serious Decisions thing kind of works, the buyer-customer breakdown. So you got to know more about the snow if you're going to actually implement this stuff. Right. At the vision level, you just need to know it's snow.
Right.
And I think we're getting closer. It's really fascinating to see. We do have a new kind of life cycle visual that balances, which is really interesting to me. We have like 3 stages of buying and 4 of customer life cycle, which for some people was really hard. They're like, shouldn't it be balanced? It's like, if you think about it, folks spend a lot more time as customers than they did in the buying motion. And it was kind of like, what? It's a little mind-blowing for some folks. So yeah, progress, right? And I think this is translating into how we're able to help our customers in their world that much more. So it's day-to-day a little much, frustrating wise, but big picture, it's fantastic.
Yep. And where we always got hung up when it was the B2B marketing team working with like the customer experience team trying to blend our models, it was always like, well, how do you account for, upsell purchasing? How do you, now you're entering a new buying cycle. Is that pre-purchase or is that another sub-circle that happens post-purchase? And then, of course, all the diagrams get really complicated, right?
Because we have a fun little one where we have the customer life cycle and then the animation has little demand waterfalls literally spinning out of each stage of the customer life cycle that we did in our main stage presentation when we introduced the retention model. Because it was like, we want to be completely honest with you guys. This is not like, and you must wait until they get to stage 4.
Right.
It's like, no.
Right. Well, because I'm sure you've seen the Laurie Wisdo model, which is just like total chaos, which represents the real buying process, right? Which is it's never linear, right? It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, left turn, right turn, you name it.
So Amy Bills and I are doing a webinar in a couple of days that we talk about, customer marketing is not just a side hustle. And one of the visuals that's really funny is like, we're trying to go like, not all customers who are loyal are advocates. Not all advocates are loyal. Not all people who've adopted, or like trying to get people to think about, this is not linear. There are subsets and Venn diagrams galore that you need to think about.
Right. Oh, it's so funny you say that, because even at Forrester, when I was running the Forrester Frontlines program, which was our customer voice program and engagement, it was the customers that were the most engaged were ones that would never call themselves an advocate. They just didn't use that term. It's like, well, no, I'm not out there advocating for you. I don't want to join an advocacy program, but I'm going to consume every piece of content. I'm going to give you my advice on the website. I'm going to jump on every webinar where I can collaborate with my peers, and but so highly engaged. But that's why I've stopped using the term advocacy as a program with customers.
Oh
Even
yeah,
if
yeah.
we're
No.
even if we're engaging them for the purpose of advocacy, we're not saying it's an advocacy program. So
Yeah, because people would really have to be over the top to consider themselves an advocate.
right. Right. So it fits in our models, our theoretical models internally when we're saying, oh, that's the ultimate, right? That's beyond loyalty, right? As you're an advocate. How many companies have models like that? But, I mean, every customer has value to the organization. If you're mobilizing them to help with customer programs, I mean, it doesn't have to just be that top tip of the iceberg, 5% of your raving lunatic fans, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't
So,
even call it, you don't even tell people they're promoters on the NPS scale. Why would you call them advocates? I mean, it's like,
right.
yeah, we got to be
Right.
careful about our internal language and how we present that out.
Right. Well, this is fantastic. Kim agrees. I love it, Kim. Thank you, everybody. This was such a great way to wrap up day one of CustomerX Con Virtual Edition 2020, to have Lisa with us. And thank you so much for not only sharing the advice to the customer marketers, but also some of the thinking that went behind that happens back in the factory to help you guys come up with this advice. So
Yeah.
too often people don't see that, but I think it adds so much rich context to where
Well,
you're
good.
coming
Thank you for
from to
inviting
now.
me. And it was so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new names too. So
We'll put out to the community the upcoming webinar, because that sounds very interesting,
sure.
what you're doing with Amy Bills.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that sounds like a super fascinating topic for our audience. We'll add that to our Slack group. So
Great. It's
so
always fun to do
so
anything with Amy. She's a party.
yes. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
And
everybody.